uscho.com. This is the USCHO Week in Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at uscho.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Good evening and welcome to the USCHO Weekend Review Special Live Selection Sunday podcast. I'm Ed Trefzger and I'm joined by Dan Rubin. Jim Connolly was supposed to be here. He's not feeling well. When you have a 5-year-old, certain things get brought into the house. And so he's a little bit under the weather, but I'm delighted to have our colleague Dan Rubin alongside. And Dan, good evening.
Hey Ed, I guess one man's misfortune is another man's good day. I am very, very, very excited to be a part of this, and I got to be honest with you. The fact that we're here, it's Selection Sunday. Our NCAA tournament is about to get underway. I don't think I've been this excited for a field in a selection in a very long time. I'm so pumped for this.
One of the things that's great about the field that is going to be announced, and we're pretty sure we know who it's all going to be, is that, you know, it's bad for the teams that are perennial powers not to be there, but I think it's great for the sport to see some new names and different teams in the field. First question, do you agree that it's good? And second, why is it happening? So is it good and why is it happening?
I think it's great. I think it's great. So let me rephrase. I think it's great in small doses. I obviously think from an interest standpoint for us hockey folk, we're going to be very excited to see some new teams, see some new blood, get a lot of the folks in there that haven't ever gone to a tournament. And there's one very obvious one that I guess I throw out there right off the bat with us as Atlantic hockey people, the fact that AIC is going to be in this tournament. I know I'm very excited. I've been very excited for their run because it's a new team. It's kind of the toppling of a dynasty in Atlantic hockey with Air Force that makes me feel really good, not only for a new team, but to see a team like an AIC jump into the tournament that's had its well publicized run here. But at the same time, for a minimalist standpoint, from a casual observer standpoint, some of those teams not being in it, I think could actually be maybe a downfall, maybe a down in a negative for what we find as a positive in the hockey community. Because if you're a hockey fan and you're a casual fan, you're waiting to see some of those national brands that maybe you're used to seeing, the Minnesotas, the Wisconsins, the Boston Colleges, some of those other teams that are out there. And you're not going to see them this year. I think you're going to be seeing some team names that you're going to be flipping the channel. You're going to see some brands and some logos on there that you've never seen before. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing yet. I suppose we'll find out in about a month or so. But for those of us who are hockey folks, I know I'm very excited. I know you're probably very excited to see some new blood and some new teams and maybe see some toppling of some dynasties here.
Well, and some of the new teams maybe are not that new. There are only 2 that are there for the first time, but Bowling Green, it's been 3 decades. But you have schools like Minnesota, Boston College, Boston University, North Dakota, Michigan, Wisconsin. Those are teams who are perennial members of the NCAA field who are not going to be in it this year. But there are quite a few that have established themselves over the last little bit that we'll see. And we'll talk for a moment here in just a moment about how they got there. Why do you think this is happening? What is changing about the landscape of hockey that so many other teams are making it in?
Well, first off, the talent pool is a lot deeper than I think it's ever been. I think the talent pool in the game of hockey has grown so well with the expansion, especially in the NHL, the fact that hockey is more readily available. The guys who are playing college hockey, if you think of guys who are 22 or 23 years old, you go back to 1996, those years in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that was really the end of hockey's last expansion. The places like Tampa, Florida, Arizona, teams were moving around. Not realignment, but teams had moved. And we're seeing the emergence from the people who were born in that era of a deeper talent pool of non-traditional hockey markets. So I think mining that market and mining some of those areas has been really great for the future status of hockey. The way we are right now and again, this is just kind of a random stream off the top of my head. But I think that's great. I think that's awesome for the game of hockey. And more importantly, when you have some of these schools in the way that hockey's grown, in the way that it's become more public, and the arms race that has happened in our sport, you're getting a lot more people involved in finding one and maybe going to another school where, you have a guy who's grown up in Arizona, who's learned how to play hockey, or grown up in Texas, and they're seeing guys go to college hockey. The best players, the top one or two of their area, of their region, might be going to a place like a Boston College as a draft pick, or like a Minnesota or North Dakota. But there's a lot of good talent out there, good college hockey talent in those junior leagues that have matriculated and have found homes at places like Minnesota State or Bowling Green, or places that aren't necessarily where 40 years ago it was the Massachusetts guys going to BU, BC, and the occasional guy at UNH or a place like that. And again, random off the top of my head. And if you were from the quote West, the West really meant Minnesota. That doesn't exist anymore. That's not what we're seeing. It's a much more national, it's a much more international game as the world has kind of grown smaller. And that to me is a great thing of what we're seeing right now.
I heard our friend Dave Starman on the Hockey Think Tank podcast that Topher Scott and Jeff Lavecchio do. He was a guest recently, and he said anywhere they win an NHL Stanley Cup in a new area, expect to see a whole lot of kids to be recruiting in about 18 years after that. So you're absolutely right. Tampa, the Stanley Cup down in Tampa several years ago has spawned a lot of youth hockey in that area. So you're absolutely right. We talked to coaches. I'm told 10, 15 more teams are what's needed at Division I to absorb all the talent. Well, let's take a look at how everybody got here. And it was fun watching all the results come in last night. 6 championship games. 3 of them went to overtime. All 6 of them had identical 3-2 final scores. And if you want to throw in the men's Division III national championship, an overtime win by Wisconsin Stevens Point over Norwich, which also went 3-2. So 7 championship games, 4 overtimes, identical scores. I guarantee you without looking it up that's never happened before. But why don't we go around a little bit in some of them. The most dramatic was a double overtime win as Minnesota Duluth won the NCHC Frozen Face-Off over St. Cloud State. Both teams knew they were in. Both teams knew they would be top 4 seeds. But in the NCHC, in 6 seasons, the regular season champion has never gone on to win the league tournament.
That's crazy. That's crazy. That's a testament to that league and that conference, which I remember when I was doing my scheduling series last summer. I talked to a couple people from the NCHC, and they seem to have the system in place that just seems to work. Their teams aren't afraid to go on the road and play anybody, anytime, anywhere type of thing. And that kind of battle hardens them and gets them ready for the postseason, so that when their teams get to the postseason and get into postseason situations, even if they're playing each other, they tend just to be more ready or readier for those situations than other teams are. And it showed. That was a great game. 10,000 people, I think it was, at the XL Energy Center. The back and forth type of game. Anytime you get to double overtime, I guess the guy who scores the goal is never going to have to pay for a cup of coffee in his hometown ever again. And Nick Swaney certainly is going home to never have to buy a cup of coffee in Duluth ever again. And when you're the defending national champions, you tip your hat and you say, hey, that's a game that you look at and you say that's the way college hockey's conference championships deserve to be decided. 2 teams that know they're getting in. Probably could have their seeding. I don't think is going to be impacted by the outcome of the game, and yet they get together and they go to town against one another, and it was a great game. I was excited to have been able to watch that from afar.
Yeah, and for both coaches, Scott Sandelin was very proud, certainly, of the Bulldogs, and Brett Larson had an attachment to the guys on the other team because he was the assistant coach who recruited most of them. And after St. Cloud swept a late season series against Minnesota Duluth, to get that little bit of revenge was a big deal. And probably when we look at the brackets, we'll see it was important for Minnesota Duluth. Had they lost, they would have been the 4th overall seed, still a 1 seed. but with this, they are the second seed. So it ended up being a little bit more than bragging rights with that. I'm just keeping an eye, as are you, on ESPNU for the selection show. There's a NCAA softball game that is in extra innings, so we'll have to see what happens with the broadcast, whether it gets bumped somewhere else or delayed. We'll keep an eye out on that. Why don't we stick with the games that went to overtime? It was also overtime in the ECAC, and it involved a little bit of controversy and a little bit of video. But Clarkson defeating Cornell for the league championship. And by the way, it was Clarkson over Cornell in the ECAC women, which was interesting. And they're in the top of the 11th between USC Upstate and Longwood in women's softball on ESPNU. So we'll see how things go with that. But Clarkson, this was huge, and they end up being a pretty high seed with the win over Cornell.
Yeah, Clarkson's going into the tournament with that 11-game unbeaten streak, and they're rolling. That was a heck of a game. And I know for Clarkson, it's been a long time coming. Last year, they went to the conference championship. They lost in overtime to a Princeton team that had caught lightning in a bottle. And won the league championship. I think is a 7 seed. This year they come out to Lake Placid. They get the win. It's their first championship, I think, in 12 or 13 years. And for Casey Jones, a big moment for him. He's a Cornell alum. Mike Schaefer was just an assistant when he played at Cornell. Jones served as an assistant coach under Schaefer. And you know, it's one of those moments when you look at it and you'd be like, for the Clarkson folks who are up there in Potsdam, that's one where you sit back and you sip your coffee in the morning, and it just feels very satisfying, especially given the Cornell Clarkson dynamic and the Western New York rivalry that I know they've had for, in that league for a number of years. And they get to go into the tournament now with 4 teams out of ECAC hockey, which I don't remember the last time that happened. I honestly
that's because
don't.
It never has. It's the first time. I take that back.
I think it happened. I think it's happened before.
It happened before Hockey East split off from the ECAC. That's how long it's been.
Okay, yeah. So that's before I'm going to date myself, and I'm going to actually make myself feel young here, Ed. That's before my time. I don't get to say that anymore. That's before my time.
Well, it's even before my time. So I have shoes older than you, so it goes back quite a ways.
It's getting further into my rearview mirror than you think, though. It's hey, I've found more gray hair this weekend watching some of these games than I think I need.
Well, there you go. So let's move on to the third league that ended in overtime, and that is one of the great stories in college hockey this year, and that's American International beating Niagara 3-2 in overtime, and a program that Eric Lang took over. Longtime head coach Gary Wright before that, but never had the resources supplied to him that Eric Lang has had, and he has done more than take advantage of them. He has put together a program that went from the basement of Atlantic hockey perennially to being the regular season champion, and now going to its first NCAA berth.
I don't think I can actually quantify for anyone listening, and I realize my professionalism is going right out the window right now. I'm throwing it right out the window. I don't think anybody can ever understand how happy and excited. There's only one team I think I could actually be more excited for than AIC to come out of Atlantic hockey, and I think that goes without saying which team that would be. But when Gary Wright retired, he'd been there for 30-something years. I remember saying that he was he had a legacy of class. It's actually the commentary that I did back in 2016, and I said that, and I had to acknowledge, and it kind of hurt to acknowledge it, that there was the obligatory mention of wins and losses, and the fact that AIC lost, and they lost a lot. And at some point, to me, what Gary Wright was able to do at AIC in teaching his players and graduating his players, what he did went over and above wins and losses. The fact that that team was a team that nobody ever really wanted to play in the second half of the year because they were always competitive and they were always good. They just didn't win. They just didn't have the wins on their record. And it was a tribute to them, those teams that came before this, that laid the foundation and set the standard. To watch AIC grow under Coach Lang and to watch what they've been able to accomplish, to win 20-something games, a national ranking. You cannot, if you have not followed this team, understand or appreciate possibly how difficult or how impressive it is that they've done this. And, they are, it's awesome. This is what college hockey is all about. A Division II standard school that plays in Atlantic hockey out of Springfield, Massachusetts. We're gonna open up the Division I National Championship Tournament. Boston College, Boston University, University of New Hampshire, the University of Maine, none of them are going to be playing in this, and American International is. That to me is awesome. And I cannot express how excited I am as an Atlantic hockey person for AIC to make it. The only team I think I would be happier for in this situation is if it were Bentley, because then I'd be going with them.
Well, there you go. Well, let's move on to the other teams. We do want to save a little bit of time before the selection show starts to go over Jason Moy's bracketology predictions, our resident bracketologist. What a comeback for Minnesota State. A couple of minutes left in the game. Bowling Green is up 2-0. 2 extra attacker goals to get the tie for Minnesota State. And then the Mavericks go on to win a 3-2 overtime win.
I think my jaw's still down on that one. It was, I wish that I could somehow speak of that game, because I have no idea how 200 seconds or whatever it was I actually just pulled up the recap. 201 seconds can change something on a dime like that. And that was like, it was one of those where as I was following along on Twitter and my mouth was still somewhere south of my jaw had dropped, it was still south of my knees and my tongue had fallen out of my mouth out the door. It was it was awesome. That was a throwback game, and the fact that it happened in Mankato was just that was awesome. That was great.
Yeah, and as it turns out, with Boston College having dropped the game to Northeastern in Hockey East, Bowling Green already knew they were in, so at least they don't have the double disappointment. And a quick amount of kudos to Chris Bergeron for getting Bowling Green back to the tournament after so many decades. A team that in the early days of the CCHA was a power and which won the national championship under Jerry York back in 1984. So a great job there. And we mentioned Hockey East. Northeastern went out to a 3-0 lead, and BC fought back and made it a close one.
Yeah, what a story that would have been. BC was such a disappointment, for lack of a better term, this year, and I don't think that's actually lack of a better term. I think that's the right term for them with the talent level and some of the expectations that were in on them. To go to 20 losses was a real hard pill to swallow for folks that follow and support Boston College. But with a team with that much talent, they go on a run. They got a run. They got through the semifinals, got all the right matchups, got everything downstream that they needed. They take on Northeastern, and to be honest, that was a matchup that I think I maybe raised an eyebrow at, thinking when Northeastern jumped out to a 3-0 lead, I said, "There's no way this is going to stay that way." Just BC was coming, and Northeastern held on. I think that's a satisfying result for a lot of people who are watching that game, sans maybe the BC fans. But it was just a good hockey game, a good college hockey game. And, Northeastern was the better team. I felt Northeastern won that game. And they held on because BC said, look, we don't want to go quietly into the night. And I think that was first off, it's probably saved the committee a lot of headaches this morning. But I think at the same time, it was a very satisfying result at the Garden for folks who were tuned in for a good old fashioned Massachusetts college hockey game.
Lastly, it was the Big Ten championship, and we talked to Jeff Jackson last week What a terrific, actually it was Thursday, wasn't it? Or Wednesday?
Yep. It was Wednesday or Thursday.
Wow. A lot has happened in between.
Lots happened.
He got his 500th win last night, and that was as Notre Dame down Penn State 3-2. And boy, early in that game, I was thinking, oh boy, Notre Dame's got to hold on, because the onslaught that came in, Cale Morris ended up making 46 saves, I believe it was, and basically 22 minutes of scoreless hockey to end the game. A flurry late with the extra attacker by Penn State. But Notre Dame goes on to the tournament and wins the Big Ten for the second straight year, and that's their second year in the conference. And Penn State ends up number 16 in the pairwise and bumped out by AIC's auto bid. So that was a huge game. And really both teams mostly playing the style they wanted to, but each team countering in some different ways to kind of make it a bit of a closer grudge match than you might have expected had one or the other been able to prevail in the way they wanted to.
Yeah, and I think the watching that game when Notre Dame had the 3-2 lead, there were a couple things that really stuck out to me. First off, we knew Penn State based off of everything that we've seen, everything that we've read, everything that we also knew when we were talking to Jeff Jackson, Notre Dame was ready for. We knew Penn State was going to come out of that gate and put the barrage on, and they did. They had 36 odd shots in through two period. Then that third period, Notre Dame did a really good job of limiting shot selection. They blocked shots where they needed to be, and they stayed out of the box. I know they were only four penalties the entire game, 2 on each team as I'm glancing down the box score. But they stayed out of the box in the third period, which I think was most important. That was everything that Jeff Jackson told us. This is it. In order to beat Penn State, we need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We were talking to them about it, and they probably did all of them at given points during the game. So Penn State did everything that they could to win that game, except put the last goal in and wind up 1-up. Notre Dame earned the win. It was at home. I had a couple friends. I had a friend of mine who I know was in the stands for that one, and electric atmosphere at the arena. And Notre Dame walks out another Big Ten championship. So congrats to them. And for Penn State, I know it's of little consolation the fact that they missed the national tournament, but they left everything out there that I think they had.
We're going to take a momentary pause for a word from our podcast sponsor, the NCAA Frozen Four, and we'll be back to look at the prognostication from our colleague Jason Moy, our resident bracketologist, when we continue. You're listening to the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot, saved by Morris. Takes the shot, Trefzger!
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Well, you're listening to a live edition of the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Dan Rubin. And Dan, our colleague Jason Moy for years has successfully predicted the teams in the NCAA brackets and often gets all the locations right. And let's just go down through what he predicted last night. The numbers are easy enough. You look at the pairwise rankings at uscho.com. You can see what teams are going to get in. And they are St. Cloud State, Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota State, UMass, Clarkson Northeastern, Quinnipiac, Denver, Ohio State, Arizona State, Cornell, Notre Dame, Harvard, Providence, Bowling Green, and American International with the auto bid from Atlantic Hockey. So the first step, you choose the 16 teams, and you break ties based on RPI. So that gives you the number one seed, St. Cloud State, Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota State, UMass, Clarkson, Northeastern, Quinnipiac, Denver is the second seed. Third seeds, Ohio State, Arizona State, Cornell, Notre Dame, and Harvard, Providence, Bowling Green, American International. So far, so good. Pretty easy to do. And some years that has led to some difficulty along the way. That's been something that in this case ended up pretty straightforward, because once you put the number one seeds in regionals according to geography, you get this: St. Cloud State, Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota State, Massachusetts, St. Cloud State in the West Regional in Fargo, Minnesota, Duluth in the Midwest Regional in Allentown. For the second year in a row, people in Allentown, Pennsylvania are surprised to find themselves in the Midwest. Minnesota State is in the East Regional in Providence, and UMass in the Northeast Regional in Manchester. Those are all good locations. But anyway, you go down through and fill in all the other stuff, and we can skip over the steps because I'm sure people can go and take a look at it if they'd like. But the four regionals you end up with end up being the West Regional in Fargo, AIC versus St. Cloud State. This is before you do any shenanigans moving them around. AIC versus St. Cloud State, and Ohio State versus Denver. That's a nice little grouping. Midwest Regional, Bowling Green versus Minnesota Duluth, Arizona State versus Quinnipiac. Bowling Green and Quinnipiac both drivable to Allentown. Arizona State's got to fly somewhere. Minnesota Duluth, they're the number 2 seed. You need to get them the best teams against them. East Regional is where you start to have a little bit of controversy. Providence, a number 4 seed, takes on Minnesota State, 14 versus 3, and Cornell versus Northeastern. You're going to get Northeastern crowds. You're obviously going to get Providence crowds. But if you're Mike Hastings, Minnesota State Mavericks, do you want to be playing a team that's essentially playing at home, even though it's not at their home rink?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a dicey situation if you're Minnesota State, and I think you have an argument there, especially because first of all, you won your conference. So I think there's an argument there that, and again, when it gets boiled down to numbers and where it is, there's obviously a straightforward way of doing things here in college hockey, but I think there's a valid argument there which says, hey, we won our conference, and the way the number is going to shake down, we're going to miss out on playing. We'd be okay. We have to travel probably because of the way the numbers all shake down, but it's not fair to have to play Providence in Providence. I'm sure they would rather move that to Manchester and play that one in Manchester, and then switch what would be the Manchester regional to the east instead of the northeast, just to give them a little bit of a slightly better advantage as the Minnesota State team not having to play a virtual road game against an at-large bid.
Yeah, and they can make the case also, for the Midwest regional being a place for UMass, but then you end up with attendance issues because then you'd have no real local teams. The Northeast Regional, attendance is not going to be an issue there. Harvard versus UMass, they're both relatively close by. I mean, it's the other end of the state for UMass, but it's not, it's a couple hours. It's not bad. Notre Dame versus Clarkson, it's not really that bad to get to Manchester from Clarkson. Notre Dame has fans everywhere, so I think they will help attendance there. So from attendance-wise, there is no problem. But the first concern is avoiding interconference matchups. There are none in this bracket. And attendance, I don't see a problem either. And so I agree with Jason Moy. We'll see what the committee does. But leave the perfect bracket in place and just go with that. So I'm thinking it was a pretty easy job for the committee.
Yeah, and I think it was made substantially easier by some of the games breaking out. Like I was saying earlier, I'm sure if Boston College had won that game, it would have been a little bit maybe dicier. Well, I mean, maybe they'd have gone to the East, or how that would have shaken down to try and move some teams around and avoid a couple of interconference matchups somewhere along the line, because they wouldn't have been able to play UMass, and because both Massachusetts schools, Amherst and Lowell, being in the same league with them. But it shakes down perfect, I think, right now. The only regional that I think maybe has, you look at and you're like, well, maybe I'm not sure how attendance is going to be when we say, well, it's at least drivable, is probably Allentown. But there's also no, with the exception of Penn State and maybe Robert Morris to a lesser degree from Atlantic Hockey, who I think is, again, Atlantic Hockey is kind of a non-factor in terms of the way you seed out the regionals. You weren't going to have a real local team to the Midwest Regional anyway. And again, I don't know if Allentown's east or west of the state, so I can't tell which schools would have been closer or where it is without Googling it right in front of me as I'm thinking it through mind to mouth real quick. But you want to hit as much as possible, and they're doing that. They're gonna do that here with these regionals exactly the way that they set up. It's the only time we ever get to say it's straightforward. Keep it straightforward. There's no real reason to break the wheel here.
Yeah, exactly. So, Allentown, by the way, is not far from New York and pretty much a short drive due north of Philadelphia. So it's way in eastern Pennsylvania. So it's by no means Midwest. Okay, so they're dumping the softball over to ESPN News and the ESPN app, and the NCAA selection special is underway. Some nice aerial footage of Buffalo, New York as the broadcast starts. I'm really looking forward to being in Buffalo. I think KeyBank Center will do a great job, and so much more has been developed around that area since back then that I think that fans are going to have a terrific time. And people who have been saying, oh, there's nothing to do in Buffalo, there's a ton to do in Buffalo. And if nothing else, if you've never been to Niagara Falls, take the half-hour, 45-minute drive up there. So, so right now the selection special is going through the automatic bids. Every single game, as we mentioned earlier on, 3-2. And we'll see how things match up with the brackets. What do you think? Do you think they're going to follow that? What are your odds right now? I'm going to put high odds that they keep it the way that it is. I'm going to go with the 75 to 85 or 90% odds. I'll even put it at 90%. But once you add the human element, I can never put anything at 100% because if I did that, then I would have a lot less complaints about sports than I think I do. And this is the one year that like I said, this is the one year where we don't have to mess anything up. So there's no real reason to do it. And I think that's the right call. I think it's going to be the call that they make up there at the NCAA. And we tongue in cheek say, let's see how they can mess this one up. And I sure as heck hope they don't. Well, they have announced the number one seed. It will be number one in the West. St. Cloud State will go to Fargo. That's exactly what we had suspected. Number two overall seed, Minnesota Duluth. They are going to be in the Midwest in Allentown. So we're on the ball with that one too. So we have Minnesota Duluth, the number two overall seed, number one in the Midwest. They became number two, as we mentioned before, by winning last night. Number three overall seed, Minnesota State. They will be number one in the East. So the East Regional is where they are going to be sent, and that is in Providence, Rhode Island.
So that's lining up with our. I'm going to say with ours, like I told Jason, any part of this.
And the fourth overall seed is going to be yeah. You're going to tell the master on that one.
Exactly.
And UMass, the number 4 overall seed, they'll be number 1 in the Northeast. So what a great season it's been for UMass. I'm sure a disappointment getting bounced from the tournament in the semifinals in Hockey East by Boston College, but still a great season for Greg Carvel and his Minutemen.
Yeah, they've really reinvented what it means to have Massachusetts hockey out in the western part of the state. And when I say Massachusetts, I refer to the team, the Minutemen, UMass Amherst, the school, University of Massachusetts, the flagship. They've done a really good job out there, and the way that they've never really dipped this entire year. They opened up the year 12-1. They never really dipped. They finished the year with a couple of losses. They know the loss at UConn doesn't really impact anything. So they deserve the number 1 seed. They deserve to be in the conversation for who deserves it at most.
So St. Cloud will take on American International, and Denver in that bracket will be the number 2 seed in that bracket. They will take on Ohio State. So far, complete bracket integrity for the NCAA selections in the West.
Boy, I can't wait to watch some of those games because St. Cloud, just a reminder, lost to Air Force last year. And I don't think it was 2 years ago they lost, but I know Air Force knocked off St. Cloud last year, and maybe a little bit of the Atlantic hockey jinx going in there to Fargo.
Yeah, and before that, Minnesota State getting dumped, you got to watch out for that. So UMass will take on Harvard, and Clarkson in the Northeast Regional is going to have Notre Dame again, exactly as predicted by USCHO.com.
I like it. I like it a lot. That regional, we can touch on it. That regional is going to be great. That's going to be competitive. Some good matchups. I like UMass a lot, but that's a tough matchup with Harvard, and that Clarkson Notre Dame game could be one of those games that we sit back at the end of it and go and just smile at what a beautiful exhibition of hockey it is. I love that regional. I really do.
Now we go to the East Regional, where Minnesota State is the number 1 seed, and we'll see they are indeed going to be matched up with Providence. Now it's at the downtown arena and not at Schneider Arena on campus, so it's not exactly a home game, but certainly a hometown crowd. And Northeastern and Cornell, the other part of that bracket, still lining up with our predictions, so we can say that we got everything correct on that. Minnesota State and Providence. I had a discussion on Twitter last night with a writer who covers things out west, and I said, look, which would you rather have? If you can't have your home crowd, would you rather have a hostile crowd or no crowd? And he agreed. You're going to have a hostile crowd that's better than none, and that could prove to fire up Mike Hastings' Mavericks against Providence.
I'm going to be in attendance for that one, so I'm going to keep a close eye out on how that's going to be, and if they come out, how hot Minnesota State comes out, because I've been pumping some of the Minnesota State tires a lot this year, especially with some of the votes. So I'm really excited there.
And in the Midwest, in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Duluth, and Bowling Green, Quinnipiac, and Arizona State. The NCAA has chosen 100% bracket integrity. So I think it was probably an easy job. We're going to hopefully be able to catch up with Steve Metcalf from Associate Athletic Director at UNH and part of the men's ice hockey committee. We have him lined up to explain the decisions, but it seems, Dan, like it was pretty straightforward.
Yep, that's what we were saying earlier, and sometimes the most easiest pick is the one to make, and I'm pretty excited that they're able to get in and that they're able to line things up correctly. I'm sure a lot of people woke up this morning and said, "Well, we can kind of know who we have 1 through 16," and I'm glad that those people are going to bed tonight knowing satisfied that they were right.
Well, Dan, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in just a little bit, but we're going to take a quick break here for a few messages, and we'll come back with more of our Selection Sunday Weekend Review special. When we come back, we'll recap the selections. You're listening to the Weekend Review Podcast Special Live Edition from USCHO.com.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot. Saved by Morris. Takes the shot. Richter!
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Passion, talent, development. NCAA hockey offers all that, and its players graduate at a 90% rate. Jonathan Taves.
Backhand score! Wow, what a goal!
Colton Parayko.
Goal!
And Patrick Patrick Sharp were stars on campus before the NHL stage. Whether you are a fan or a player, nothing compares to college hockey. Visit collegehockeyinc.com and follow @College Hockey.
Champions of the college hockey world.
Man, do I love card night. You ready, boys? You got a king?
Go, fish dad!
Oh, come on! This is WWE superstar Titus O'Neil. The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Learn more at 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov.
Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, our live Selection Sunday special. I'm Ed Trefzger with Dan Rubin. Dan, let's start looking at these various breakdowns. Again, exactly as we expected from our bracketologist, Jason Moy. Out in the Midwest, let's go out west, all the way out west to Fargo. The number 1 seed, St. Cloud, will take on the 4th in that region, AIC. Number 8 overall, Denver, number 2 in the region, against number 9 overall, Ohio State.
So let's start with that top game, St. Cloud against AIC. So I'll come right off the bat and say that there is no secret to the AIC game when you look at their stats, and it is telling. And that is, first of all, they have and again, I'm coming at this. Luckily, you and I both having the Atlantic hockey background. If people who are listening are unfamiliar with Atlantic hockey, it kind of gives us a chance to introduce you to that team. Offense can score. Their offense is very good. They were one of the best offenses in the league. I think they were the best by far. And they're very good third period and overtime. They ended the season something like close to plus 20 in the third period and overtime. They are a very, very good late game team. Defensively, they're going to present some problems for St. Cloud because they limit shots. These are guys who give up their bodies. Goaltending only sees about 25 to 27 shots per game. But if it gets through, statistically, that's where AIC's hole is in goaltending. Their goaltending stats are, and not to knock Zacharias Skog or Stefano Durante, but they're the only team in Atlantic hockey that was left in the Final Four that had save percentages below 90%. It's a line that I used in the preview, and it's not going to change into the national tournament. Zach Skog has an .896 save percentage and a 2.75 goals against average. So normally you see a guy with a 2.75 and you're thinking he probably has a save percentage about 91 or 92%, but he doesn't. Flip side, they're going to draw a St. Cloud team that 91% save percentage in Rennick back there in goal, 2.19, very good defensively, very good offensively. First indication looking at St. Cloud is trying to find maybe something that they're not good at, and to be honest, there isn't much. The only thing I guess I can maybe throw out there is that, they only won 4 games when they were trailing at the end of the second period. To be fair, they were only trailing at the end of the second period 7 times. So the 4-2-1 record's still pretty darn good. So for AIC, it's a tall order. I think that they have a blue collar team, and it's going to be an exciting game. Sometimes an older team, AIC a little bit older, a little bit more physically developed in terms of average age. It's going to be that's how you pick it off, and I think there's a very direct way, which is impose a physicality, limit shot attempts, and see what happens there. In the other game, the Ohio State-Denver game, I look at Ohio State this year, Ed, and I see a team that did a really, really good job not allowing goals. Tommy Napier is insane, and he's only a sophomore. And I know he did a timeshare with Sean Romeo, but he had a 1.91 goals against average, and Romeo, who played in 17 games, had a 2.58 goals against average. Yeah, this is a team that's coming in. They lost to Michigan State in the last game of their year, and then they gave up 5 goals to Penn State in the Big Ten tournament. But they're a very, very good hockey team, regardless of the struggles down the stretch. They haven't won a game. So their only win since February 9th, it looks like, was their win over Michigan State back on March 1st. So they're going to get a Denver team that is Denver. We talked about hockey royalty and some of the hockey teams out there. Denver is one of those teams that you think is going to be in the conversation every year, and they are, and there's a good reason for it. They've got talent. They've got a deep lineup, and they're very talented. The only reason why Denver maybe winds up in this regional with a 2 seed is because they went 11-10-3, but they're coming out of one of the best conferences, the best conference in college hockey. So there's a power-on-power matchup, a power-on-power type of regional, and I'm really excited to see what happens through that entire regional, just seeing who gets through. I think there's some potential there for some low-scoring games that are throwback type of hockey that teams are getting up and down. I'm really pumped for it.
One big question, and I think this same question will be asked about Arizona State. Ohio State has only had one game in 27 days, and that was the game in which they were upset by Penn State. Do you think rust will be a factor for the Buckeyes?
I would normally say yes, but I think you in that time period, you're doing what it takes at this point. Good teams don't come out with much rust. If you believe that is a factor, then sure. But I don't think rust to the good hockey teams, a team that I believe is the caliber of Ohio State, is going to be as impacted as maybe a team that's coming back after a month off in the middle of the season when they still have the second half of the year. I think you're coming out, you've been scrimmaging, you've been playing mini games almost in practice. I feel like those teams have enough in the tank that when you get down to the national tournament, the rust isn't as much of a factor. It shouldn't be, at least.
Well, when we look at the Midwest region, the number 2 overall seed, Minnesota Duluth, is placed there. They'll match up against Bowling Green State, and we had some nice things to say about the Falcons earlier on. Quinnipiac, not a long drive to Allentown from Hamden, Connecticut, will take on the upstart Arizona State University Sun Devils and Greg Powers' team.
I think there's not a person alive who's not excited to see. There cannot be anybody who is upset at Arizona State, and I know everybody's a little intrigued, a little interested to see what happens with an independent, to see if they're for real at this level. Not to say that they haven't been for real at this level to this point. I think everybody kind of watches this with one eyebrow raised, because you look at the level of these teams and the fact that they had to play brutal competition all year to get to this point. The fact that they swept Princeton, who was a defending conference champion. They split with BU, who's a very good team. They swept Michigan State. They split with Penn State. There's a team that had to earn its way in by beating the right teams at the right time. They did that. And I still think people are going to go, look at them with a little bit of doubt. I think that's healthy because of the losses to Omaha, the losses to Cornell, the fact that down the last month of the season, they beat Atlantic hockey teams 4 times, which when you're a quote power conference team or a power team, those are typically games you should handle. I readily admit that. So it's going to be really interesting. I know a lot of people are going to be like me that are just kind of really interested to see what happens to a team that you want to see if they can prove it. And they're going up against a Quinnipiac team that also has something to prove, because Quinnipiac, I was shocked that Brown kind of went through them in the quarterfinals the way that they did. That's their. Yeah. I mean, they got rolled a little bit. I know it was a couple of 1-goal games, but Brown looked really good against Quinnipiac, and Quinnipiac's going to go into that game, Ed, with something to prove.
Well, and it's also going to be a matchup of 2 of the very best goalies in Division I, Andrew Shortridge for the Bobcats, Joey Decord for Arizona State. And that would lead you to believe it might be a 2-1, 1-0 type of game. But who knows? It could be 7-6 because both teams also can score.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be wild, and it's going to happen. It's going to be the game that when you have 2 teams that are playing with their lives on the line like that, they're gonna lay it all out there, and that's going to be. You hope that it turns into as good a game as you want it to be, because these teams look even.
And, in the case of Minnesota Duluth, it's been 14 years, I think it's correct, that since we've had a repeat winner in Division I with the national championship. Duluth got there a year early, maybe. They're going to be really itching to get a second one.
Yeah, and that's a team that's well conditioned. They're strong. You watch them, and they're just seem to be one of those teams that you look at them, and it's like watching the old Red Army team. You just look at me like, well, they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, they're better than us in every single capacity. How are we going to go out and win this game? Well, I don't know. Let's go do it. And they're just a good hockey team, phenomenal hockey team. And when you're the defending champs, I use this line. It's with the Ric Flairism. To be the man, you got to beat the man. Someone's going to have to beat the man at some point, or we're going to have a repeat champion because they're as good as anyone.
When we look at the East Regional, this one is the one that brought up a little controversy. Providence is not the host program for that. It actually is Brown University, located there also in Rhode Island. So even so, Providence ends up being placed against Minnesota State. It's a straight-out 3 versus 14 matchup. We talked about this a little bit before the announcements. Is this an issue, or if you're Minnesota State, are you going to look at this opportunity to thrive against a hostile crowd?
I don't think you can look at it any other way. I think if you get hung up, look, that's for us to talk about, right? That's for us to sit back and say that they're going to get stuck and they're going to be playing this team and that team and why is it there and all the stuff. By the way, shout out the Dunkin' Donuts Center, which is the home arena for Providence College basketball. So Providence College might actually be playing under their own banners of their Final Four basketball team performance and Big East championship. So even though they're not the host school, that's a host arena for that college. But with us saying all of that, if Minnesota State goes into that game and says, why are we playing a road game in the national tournament as the number 3 seed? You can't do that, because if you're doing that, then you're not focusing entirely on the game. And I think that you look at it and you say, look, this is what it is, and you've got to move on. I think they're going to do that because this is also a Providence team that won its way in. The 3-game loss to Boston College aside, you go back to beginning of February, or even the end of January, and I don't think Providence was on our radar as a team. I think we called them a bubble team, and sure, they got in on the bubble, but that last month, they only lost 1 game before the playoffs, and they beat Lowell, they beat UMass, they beat BU, they tied BU, they picked up a couple of wins against Boston College for pairwise purposes, and otherwise, I think that really they're coming in pistol hot. I mean, they're a very, very good hockey team.
That's going to be one of the best 1 versus 4 matchups for sure. The other half of that bracket, Northeastern and Cornell, Jim Madigan has had the Huskies playing great hockey for several seasons now. And you've got at Cornell Mike Schaefer, who's kind of retooled the Big Red over the years, as the sort of style they used to use is kind of legislated out of existence, but still a very physical team. That should be a terrific matchup too.
Yep, they're back in a regional out in New England, and they're a team that just seems to you look down the list of ECAC teams and you say, boy, when's Cornell going to go away? And they never really do, because they always seem to find a way to reinvent the right win at the right time. They were really hot in January this year when they beat Arizona State twice, and they beat Harvard. They beat every team they've needed to beat. They beat Clarkson during the regular season. I know they lost in overtime, but they pounded Brown in the semifinal, and they were they are going to come out and not they're gonna step into Northeastern and say, look, you want to win this game, you got to go through us to do it. And for Northeastern's sake, Hockey East champions who have only lost 1 game since February 7th, they're going to say that's fine and deliver their best humanly possible shot. So this, to me, might be the best regional in the tournament, because these teams that are coming in are like perfect foils for one another. The fact that Minnesota State is so good of a hockey team, but they're playing a road game against a very hot Providence team, and then you have Northeastern and Cornell looking at each other and saying, all right, we're going to do it. This is going to happen, and it's going to be a great game, because Northeastern defensively is probably one of the better teams I think I've seen in person this year.
And let's turn to the Northeast Regional. There have been 3 really great stories in college hockey this year. One of them, Arizona State. But the other 2 have been happening in Western Massachusetts. We've already talked about American International, but probably the biggest story in college hockey this year has been UMass, #NewMass. And they will host Harvard in Manchester. Regionally, it's going to be great for attendance. And UMass continues to get to play teams that they would play if they were allowed in the Beanpot.
Well, 2 years ago, UMass didn't win a game at home after December 2nd. They went 5-29-2. I pulled it up. I remember how poor that team looked at times the second half of the year. They took beatings, 6 goals, gave up 6 goals, I think a handful of times. And the next year they got a little bit better. This being last season. They still lost 20 games, but they won a playoff series against Vermont and still were not great down the second half of the season. They lost 5 or 6 games in a row, and now they've turned it around. They're a great story. They've got 28 wins. Did slip in the semifinals, and I think down the stretch of the season, didn't play as good of hockey as they would like. 3 or 4 losses in the regular season down the stretch was double the losses they'd had to that point. And they opened up the year. They were great. They're former number 1 team, and they've been a great story. But now it's kind of like turning the page. Hockey East has dealt with a little bit of been dealt blows by us up here in Media Land. Where we're saying, well, Hockey East doesn't have it anymore, or they've lost it, and they're not the best conference in the East, and the best team in Hockey East is good, but I don't know if it can compete with teams in the West or compete with other teams. And we're going to find out really how good UMass can be in a regional that is designed. I know Manchester isn't that far from Boston, but oh man, that's going to be great for those of us up here in Massachusetts, because UMass is playing Harvard, and Harvard is Harvard. I mean, you know what you're getting out of them. They're going to be a good team. It's one of those teams with a good core. And in the other game, you have either an ECAC champion, where people believe out here in the East, there's a good amount of hockey people who are saying ECAC might be the best East conference, and Notre Dame, who, like you said earlier, is going to draw. They're going to have, that's a home game no matter where they are sometimes, especially out here in Boston. They have tons of fans out here, and they just won the Big Ten. So that is a potential group of death for UMass, because my God, that is good regional.
Yeah, and Clarkson and Notre Dame, 2 coaches, a younger coach in Casey Jones, a veteran coach in Jeff Jackson, who both have engineered systems that their teams are very good at executing.
No, yeah, they play their systems to a T, and Clarkson's won, like, I think 7 of their last 10, and there's a formula to the way they win some of these games, which is basically shut teams out and shut them down. You look down their schedule, a bunch of 3-0 wins in there, shutouts, one goal allowed, 2 goals allowed, a few more with 3 goals allowed. Notre Dame plays a little bit more tempo to their style, but they got hot at the right time, won their way in. I remember we talked to Jeff Jackson. We talked to Coach Jackson last week, and we said, well, do you look at the pairwise? And he goes, no, because if we just want to win. We just want to win the game we're playing. And I told the guys, stop looking at that. I'm sure they are, but don't look at it. So they didn't, and they clearly have something going on there, because they have they turned it on at the right time. They got hot. They're playing their best hockey into the tournament. One of those teams has to lose that game, and I think anybody, you get in there, you get your system, you play, you listen to your coach, and you see what comes out on practice. It's gonna be like I said, that regional. I love that regional. That is. I know I'm like super upbeat, and I'm probably super energetic, and I get my juices going for the tournament, but I kind of wish I'd taken up Jimmy on the hey, do you want to work the East Regional or the Northeast Regional? I should have taken the one further away from my house.
Well, there you go. Well, neither one of them is that far. I know for you folks in New England, anything over 30 minutes, you pack an overnight bag, but those are both pretty easy commutes for you, I think, Dan.
45 miles, I get a cooler with iced tea, bags of chips. My wife goes to Trader Joe's for a 45-minute ride up Route 128. And we're going to Trader's. We're going to get the cookie butter sandwich cookies, the veggie sticks. It's a 45-minute ride.
Well, there you go. Meanwhile, in the rest of the East, we drive 6 hours before lunch. So there you go.
To be fair, 6 hours could be the same distance if it's rush hour out here.
That is true. Before we take a break and bring in a special guest to help us break this down and understand the decision making in this, let's first of all bracket integrity. They kept to it 100%. Your thoughts on that? I think it's the best and fairest way for all the teams participating.
How many times do we talk about bracket integrity and we find out a way that, well, this has to move and this has to move for attendance, or this moves for geography, or this, that, and the other thing. And it doesn't happen often that we get bracket integrity. So I'm trying to think if bracket integrity for me sometimes means that we have to keep the integrity with the geography and attendance and intra-conference matchups. That's keeping integrity. So the fact that we have to go to quote that we can go to quote bracket integrity with this is actually a weird switch for all of us. This is not the norm. This is great. This is different. So anyone who looks back over the last several years, this is different. This is not the norm, and this is what college hockey has become. That we have enough teams that we can do this, that are in.
Well, Dan, we're going to take a break. We'll be with you till 8 o'clock Eastern. We'll be back with more of the Weekend Review Sunday Selection Show from USCHO.com.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Passion, talent, development. NCAA hockey offers all that, and its players graduate at a 90% rate. Joe Pavelski.
Backhand scores! Wow, what a goal!
Johnny Gaudreau. And Torrey Krug were stars on campus before the NHL stage. Whether you are a fan or a player, nothing compares to college hockey. Visit collegehockeyinc.com and follow @collegehockey.
Champions of the college hockey world!
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot. Saved by Morris. Takes the shot.
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Where do you want to go to lunch?
I'm having a stroke.
Did you hear what I said?
I'm having a stroke.
Why aren't you answering me?
I'm having a stroke.
When someone is having a stroke, they may not be able to say it with words, but their body language will tell you loud and clear. Look for FAST. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911 immediately. Know the sudden signs. Spot a stroke fast. Visit strokeassociation.org. Brought to you by the American Stroke Association and the Ad Council.
There are many sounds in your daily life. Ones that make you smile. Ones that help you relax. And there are some sounds that can help save lives. Wireless emergency alerts, now on many mobile devices, use a unique sound and vibration to bring you critical information about emergencies in your area. With updates from local sources you know and trust, you can be in the know wherever you are. Learn more at ready.gov/alerts. Brought to you by FEMA and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, a special live edition here on Selection Sunday. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Dan Rubin, and we're now joined by the Deputy Athletic Director at the University of New Hampshire, Steve Metcalf, who is a member of the ice hockey, Men's Division I Ice Hockey Committee. And Steve is gracious enough to join us to answer some of our questions about the selection of the teams in the field. So first of all, Steve, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure to be on with you guys.
I guess the first question is, how easy was it to put together this bracket, this group of 16 this season?
I have to say, it's probably been my couple of years on the committee. This has probably been one of the most straightforward brackets. I mean, as you followed the games last night, looked like there could be some upsets and some games going to overtime. there were so many different scenarios, but when the dust settled at the end of the night and, we looked at the top 16 teams, we just started laying it out like 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, all the way down. And usually you're going to run into some conflicts and some interconference matchups, and we didn't have any of those. So that's what made this process, a lot more straightforward this year.
Is that the first thing you worry about, the interconference matchups in the first round?
Yeah, that's something that we do our very best to avoid unless a conference has, I think our policy, unless they have 5 or more teams, in the tournament, then we're going to try and avoid those. And I think that's just, generally good for business policy. And, so we didn't have any of those to work around, which, I'd say oftentimes there's 1 or 2 of those. And so, that was maybe a little unusual, but it certainly made our work a lot easier.
Another thing I know you consider is attendance in the regionals. And some seasons it's difficult, but it looks like you have a bracket that is going to be a pretty good draw in each of the 4 regions.
Yeah, so you're right. We do try and help the regions. Attendance-wise, obviously they're trying to sell tickets, and there's a revenue component, but also atmosphere for the guys playing. I've always heard from hockey teams over the years, like they like playing in front of people and atmosphere, even if they're rooting against them. And so we want to have people at the regions. And so, when we started laying out the games and keeping, the 4 teams together in different regions, St. Cloud was, a natural to stay in Fargo. And then, UMass was a natural as the one to go to Manchester. And then as the things just started breaking, it ended up Providence and Northeastern, both in Providence. And then, in Allentown, I think, the 2 teams there that might drive more attendance than you might think are Quinnipiac, which is only 3 hours away. I think people forget how close those 2 schools are, the 2 sites are, and Arizona State, which is obviously, new in this, but it's a big school. They got a lot of alums, and they got a lot of alums on the East Coast, especially around the New York City area. So we think they'll draw, fairly good.
Now, people may not realize how close Allentown is both to Philadelphia and to New York City, so travel to that regional should not be too difficult.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, like I said, Quinnipiac is closer than people think, but I also think Quinnipiac's a team that draws some fans as well.
The one that people were questioning or speculating on last night, once we knew who all the teams most likely were going to be, nearly definitely were going to be, was Providence and Minnesota State. Now, Providence is not the host of that East Regional, and as a number 4, they certainly would be close by. It's not at their home arena, but at Dunkin' Donuts Center. But was there any consideration, was there any discussion about whether it would be proper to have a number 3 overall seed take on essentially a home team?
Yeah, there was, that issue with Providence and a couple of other switches we looked at. And at the end of the day, we just prioritized the integrity of the bracket over everything else. And, oftentimes some of the criticisms we get is for straying from that, because we're trying to avoid different things like the conference matchups. And so trying to have that bracket integrity and able to do that. And, having Providence play in Providence is an outcome of that. It just didn't seem, that it wasn't worth undoing to us. And it would certainly help the region attendance wise. And we certainly didn't see a disadvantage in doing that. And we've done exactly this before. And so this wasn't the first time the committee had done exactly this with the same team in the same regional.
Steve, when you look at the committee and you look at the fact that there are, people coming in from different perspectives from the eastern part of college hockey, the western part of college hockey, this year being straightforward as it is, but just in the conversation, how much kind of a discussion comes in from different perspectives, and how do you take those perspectives into account or as you're looking ahead from the even, Saturday before you have the discussion about what could happen, taking the perspective that says, well, a team from the West might think this, or a school from the East might think this in terms of what you're working on?
Well, I think what everyone on the committee is doing, they're all, kind of working on brackets themselves and what makes sense. And so everyone, like you said, is coming at it from a different perspective, a different league. They're more familiar with some teams than others. And, so when I'm getting text messages first thing this morning from another committee member, and he's thinking the bracket is the same as I'm thinking, and we have had, no conversation about it in the last 24 hours. And then, before our conference call this morning, I'm shooting a note to the other committee members, and he's like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, without me telling him, what I was going to suggest on the call. And we're all thinking the same thing. It just goes back to the first thing I said about, just the way the bracket laid out, seating wise and integrity wise. And we're all kind of thinking the same thing independently. We come together, and, the conversation was pretty straightforward. We looked at a couple tweaks. They just didn't seem to make any sense. We talked about this Providence thing, and, we thought the best solution was obviously what we did. And, but, we knew people would ask again about it, just like they did, I think 2 years ago, 4 years ago. I'm losing track of the time now. The last time Providence had a similar situation, I think it was 2015, actually, because I think that was the year they ran all the way to the national championship.
And the diversity of these teams, the fact that it's different teams that we've seen in the past, some newer teams too. Just how exciting is that? I know it's exciting for us as hockey people, but what's the perspective? Is there excitement? I guess I should say that it's different teams, maybe some teams that some people aren't as used to, or from the other side of it. Is there a concern at all, or is there a genuine excitement that some of those teams that people might recognize, the North Dakotas and the Minnesotas and teams like that, aren't in, and you have your new teams in that people might not recognize as much, the Bowling Greens and some of those other maybe not as national brands, but are very good hockey brands?
Yeah, I think having the teams is it's good for parity. It's good for the game. It's good for the college game to have some new faces in there. I mean, I just saw you guys probably watched the show and saw that same, information that ESPN put on about those 5 or 6 schools and how many tournament appearances and national titles, and all of them not being in the tournament this year. But, I'm sure they'd all like to be in, but think how exciting it is for Arizona State, such a new program. And like I said, Bowling Green and UMass. How about UMass? Like, they're a number 1 seed, and I don't think they've been in the tournament in 12 years. And having, my day job at UNH, we played those guys, in the playoffs. And let me tell you, they're a really, really strong team. And so they haven't been in the tournament for 12 years. Now they're a 1 seed. I think that's awesome for the game of college hockey.
Now that the brackets are chosen, you look ahead to the Frozen Four in Buffalo, and I know you, and I've talked to a couple of members of the committee, have plenty of duties to take care of in Buffalo. And in the regionals, what are the next steps for your committee going all the way until we award a national champion?
So, we've kind of divided up where the committee is going to go, next weekend for the regional site. So we'll all split up and head to, a regional to represent the committee and help the NCAA staff and making sure everything's, running smooth and the teams are being taken care of and all those kind of things. So, we'll have a bunch of conference calls tomorrow with all the teams, all the participants, and then we'll all travel off to the regional sites next weekend. And then I guess we'll get right into the business of finalizing everything with Buffalo, talking with all the, supervisor officials and looking through the official assignments and stuff like that for the Frozen Four. And then, we'll all get to, the committee will all get to Buffalo on the Tuesday of that week. And so typically what we'll do is the committee will, whatever regional site you've been at, the regional champion that comes out of the site and goes to the Frozen Four, that committee member will be the liaison with that team going right through to their end of their season. So, they'll kind of try and pay a little extra attention to that team that they've been assigned to, and it's just kind of monitoring, making sure everything's going smooth, answering questions. I mean, the folks in Buffalo have done this before, although it's been a number of years. There's certainly some people that were there last time; they're still there, and Buffalo's they've got a great organizing committee there, the Sabres and the building, and they've been fantastic to talk with. I'm talking to those guys every week or two right now.
Well, and some folks who haven't been to Buffalo since it was there the last time are going to be in for a very pleasant surprise. That whole area around the arena has been developed. I expect, and I'm sure you do too, that the fan experience is going to be phenomenal come April 11th.
Yeah, I went with our team, UNH, in 2003 to Buffalo. We lost in the championship game, and so I have my own set of memories from the last time we were there. And I've been to Buffalo, a couple months ago as we did a site visit and planned for this year. And I can tell you, you're right, it's a lot different. The Harbor Center and everything they've done down there, the Pakula family, they've just done an incredible job of the building, the hotel, the rinks, and everything around it. And it was fabulous. And of course, we went out and had some wings, and I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of that when we're out there for the Frozen Four.
Well,
Gabriel's Gate is the place that I'd recommend.
There you go. Well, Steve Metcalf, Deputy Athletic Director at University of New Hampshire, member of the Men's Division I Ice Hockey Committee. Thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to Buffalo, and hopefully we'll bump into you there and have a chance to say hello in person.
Great. Thanks very much for having me on, guys, and I look forward to hopefully meeting you and seeing you in Buffalo.
And we'll be back with more of USCHO's Weekend Review podcast.
Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online.
Speed and precision, unrelenting power. This trophy is not given, it must be earned. The 2019 NCAA Frozen Four, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo.
With a shot. Saved by Morris. Takes the shot.
Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 and get your tickets today.
Passion, talent, development. NCAA hockey offers all that, and its players graduate at a 90% rate. Joe Pavelski.
Backhand scores! Wow, what a goal!
Johnny Gaudreau. And Torrey Krug were stars on campus before the NHL stage. Whether you are a fan or a player, nothing compares to college hockey. Visit collegehockeyinc.com and follow @collegehockey.
Champions of the college hockey world!
Welcome back to the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, our live Selection Sunday show. By the way, we're going to be live at the Frozen Four Wednesday through Saturday at 716 Restaurant. I don't remember the exact terms, Dan, but 716 right in the building with the hotel there at Harbor Center. Jim Connolly and I will be there each day for 2 hours. I'm sure Dan will get you involved as well, as you will be covering the Frozen Four along with some of the staff at USCHO.com.
Oh, you'd think I'd miss an opportunity to sit in with you guys. You'd think you'd be nuts. I can't wait to get out there. I haven't been to I've only done one Frozen Four in my lifetime, and it was here in Boston where I live, and I can't wait to get out on the road and get out there, crown a national champion. From what everyone said, it's going to be a great arena, great area. This is what it's all about. I can't tell everyone. I know it's kind of cliche to hear me go how jacked and pumped I am about everything. It's very Pete Carroll like, but I am very excited to get on this road and see what we got for the NCAA championship, because between now and 3 weeks from now, at April 17th, it's going to be that weekend. Not April 17th.
April 13th.
April 13th. April 17th. We'll have all finally survived it. This is what it's all about. National championship. We're going to see someone crowned in the next month. This is awesome. Can't wait.
Well, I share your enthusiasm, I will admit. Well, it was great for Steve Metcalf to join us and talk a little bit about the selection. Really nothing controversial, and it sounds like it was a fairly easy job, and they still ended up with maybe some of the best brackets that we've seen in several seasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that it all worked out that way, and I'm sure that everybody on the committee was saying this is really how easy it's going to be for us. And it's really what it was. We got ourselves a highly competitive bracket. We got some really compelling matchups, and we've all been using the term bracket integrity, and everyone's been using it. It's amazing to think about the fact that everything broke the way that it either needed or everybody wanted in those situations with their brackets. And I'm going to guess that everybody kind of had a similar bracket, except for maybe, year one. Let's see if I could throw this in there and convince them on it. But it was refreshing that everybody was on the same page. It was refreshing that everybody was as in on this as it really does appear. So now we all get to sit back and wait to see what happens. But I love it when everything has a clear-cut answer like this.
Well, and when you get back to it, when you look at whether Providence should have been moved, you could not move Providence to the Northeast Regional because that would be a Hockey East matchup between UMass and Providence.
Yep.
And if you move them to the Midwest Regional in Allentown, then you have the second overall seed playing a very strong Providence team. And then you have to put Bowling Green too far away from folks to drive from Ohio to Pennsylvania. I mean, it's a several-hour drive, but you take the I don't want to give a travel log here, but you take the Pennsylvania Turnpike across the Keystone State, and you're there. So you'd end up making things worse by moving it around, and everything else just fell into place. So I really think they did a good job. I suppose they could have swapped to the entire East and Northeast brackets. That would have been the only way to move Providence out of Providence to keep some integrity, but then you start to maybe make things less attractive from a regional standpoint. So leaving everything the way it spelled out is probably, again, the right decision by the committee.
Yeah, and it feels like that Manchester Regional is very Boston-ish when you come to the teams that are in there, and the fact that Manchester's not that far from the city, and the teams that are involved have very strong fan bases out here. And I joke a lot with people in general just about my general that I can count the number of times on one hand I've probably left Eastern Massachusetts, but it's one of those regionals when you really just needed to have all of those teams, the UMasses, the Notre Dames, the Harvards. They have to stay in the regional that you would feel would be the Northeast, quote, Boston regional, and they're the teams that go there. And Clarkson makes sense in that regard to put them with all of them because they're a Northeast team there too, coming in from Potsdam. If you're looking at the East Regional, Providence, Minnesota State, Cornell, Northeastern, and you flip flop them, well, you're taking a regional that kind of has that feel and that appeal, and you're moving it to an area down in Providence that does feel. We joked earlier in the broadcast about the fact that if you put something 30 minutes outside of Boston, pack your travel bag, but it really does feel that way, and you're going to lose some appeal from the people who live out this way. And I'm sure everyone in the committee, especially a guy like Steve Metcalf, who's at UNH, understands the dynamic of when you're in New England. If you're going to move that regional down to Providence and move Providence up to Manchester, you're playing with some potential fire of fan bases in Boston that, I'm sure they would have traveled, especially UMass, especially Notre Dame, but it looks better, it feels better when it's in Manchester. So why don't you just leave it there? It just made the most sense. So they did that. And, we've talked a lot about, well, Minnesota State has to play a road game. And if that's the most controversial thing that we're talking about in this entire thing, then that tells you exactly that the bracket was fine. If that's the most important, if that's the most controversial part of this, then the bracket was fine to begin with.
Well, let's before we wrap up this evening, I'd like to talk about the teams who either are going for the first time or haven't been in a long time. And you talked a little bit about American International at the beginning of the program, but just a couple of words about what this means for that program to make it to the NCAA tournament?
I talked about them from a sense of what they've had to overcome. The fact that when you look at a program that a couple of years ago, I'm not sure people who aren't in Atlantic hockey don't understand or don't truly can't fathom the fact that the programs when they were upstarts and the quote unquote cost containment league, that these programs were vastly underfunded in comparison to your other programs. They played in the municipal ranks. You and I have both been to the Olympia Ice Center. Mm-hmm. And let's just think about the program that played at the Olympia Ice Center, which was a 3-sheet municipal rink in West Springfield, a little tough to get to. Occasionally you'd have a kid's birthday party going on in the foyer when you'd be trying to bring your radio gear in. That, didn't necessarily have the facilities, the same facilities as a Northeastern or even as a UMass or the other teams that are out here. That's a team that's going to the national tournament, that's moved into the AHL facility out in Springfield, that has treated them fantastic out there, that has put in a little bit of the sweat equity that other programs have never needed to put in, or in some cases wouldn't understand certain things like a coach having to do the laundry. And I know I talked to Rick Gotkin from Mercyhurst earlier in the year about every coach in Atlantic hockey knows what that's like. Yep. And he would contend that other leagues, they don't know that. This is a program where the fact that they are here, the fact that this has happened for AIC is if 10 years ago when I got started in Atlantic hockey, it was unfathomable that we would be sitting here looking at us and looking at AIC and saying they're in the national tournament. And I don't mean that as a discredit to the players who were there, the coaches who were there. It just was not. It was not going to happen back in those days, and the fact that it has is a tribute to those players too, who put in the sacrifice for the brand and helped build it and helped be there and have given those guys the pride to say, look, we're going to take all of you along for the ride. Because I know that one league championship, that first league championship, means so much to that program and for us in Atlantic hockey. The fact that we're all so excited for them, that should tell you exactly what that championship for the conference championship means for them.
Arizona State, an independent program, still looking for a conference. For Greg Power's squad to be the number 10 overall seed and to make it into the NCAA tournament is just huge news for college hockey.
Well, I hope those folks out at UNLV or that we always joke about, the UNLVs, the Illinois, the USCs, the UCLAs, whoever's going to come next. I don't know who it is, but I hope they're watching this, and I hope they see a next step in the fact that you can do it. The fact that Arizona State is kind of the cornerstone for, if you can convince somebody in a good hockey market and an emerging hockey market to say, look, we can make a donation, we can look what we can do. I know Arizona State carries a lot of weight in terms of college sports in general. They were just in the basketball tournament as well, and football is obviously a huge deal there with Herm Edwards as the head coach. They're a very, very strong brand, but at the same time, they have gotten to this point because they knew how to build the program the right way. And there are other schools that I'm sure were watching this. Arizona's a good hockey market. I think the Coyotes have done a good job of starting to formulate a strategy there to shore up their position where it was maybe uncertain a few years back. And I'm sure there are other teams and other markets in places like Las Vegas, or people in Las Vegas, I shouldn't say teams, or in California where hockey's growing, and or in Texas, and saying, hey, if Arizona State can do it, why can't we? And I hope that spurs somebody. Paul Weston likes to use the term the fairy godmother who can wave the magic cash wand. I hope that spurs somebody to look at Arizona State and say, they did it. So why can't we do it? And that leads to the 12 or 13 team growth to get into the talent pool that we were talking about.
Well, we're running a little bit over, but I do want to get to the other two schools who haven't been in quite some time. Last time Bowling Green was in the NCAA tournament, their head coach was Jerry York, and that was 1990. Chris Bergeron, a Miami alum, has come along, and very steadily and deliberately and consistently built Bowling Green better and better each year, and now they're back to the NCAAs.
I think about my old international marketing professor at UMass Dartmouth. Okay, his name was Stephen White. He was a Bowling Green. He was a Bowling Green graduate in 1985, Bachelor of Science, and he loved that he went to Bowling Green. He was probably one of my favorite professors in college. He loved that he went there. And when they got in and it became apparent they were getting into the tournament, he was the first guy I thought of, because I can't imagine how happy he's going to be to be able to wear his Bowling Green sweatshirt and wear his Bowling Green hat and root on his alma mater in the national tournament. Like that's just a great feeling, because he would remember what that was like 30 odd years ago. So I'm sure it's been a long wait and well worth it for those folks out in Ohio.
Lastly, UMass. Last time they were in the tournament, they lost in the regional in Rochester, New York. Their head coach was Don Toot Cahoon, and their goaltender was a guy you may have heard of named Jonathan Quick.
Hey, you know what? UMass, they the last couple of years, in the last decade or so, I would make the joke, wink wink, hush hush, that wink wink, nod nod, that the real UMass hockey was up in Lowell, right? UMass Lowell had been had grown. They were beating teams. UMass was down the bottom. UMass has always been a basketball school. That's been the public perception. Number one in the early 90s in basketball, a Final Four team at one point. And UMass basketball has always been the primary kind of focus. That's not the case right now. UMass hockey's got a great run going, and I think they can finally look up at Lowell and say, we've got the system back. We're the UMass system, back in the flagship. Now, whether or not they can put together a deep run, I think we could say that about all 6 teams. I guess we'll find out. But it's got to feel good for them to go to bed tonight. I think of the fans who have stuck through them through thick and thin in hockey, and it's got to feel really good to look at them with a little number one next to their name. I know it felt good when they were the number one team in the country, and now it'll feel good for them to play up in the Northeast Regional, essentially at home out here in the Bay State and out here in the Commonwealth.
Well, why don't we wrap things up? I guess if I had to sum things up, I would say that the bracket really created itself. It's a terrific bracket. There's some great matchups. I won't use the term bracket integrity, but certainly seeding integrity. The 1 through 16 all fell into place without any adjustments being needed. It sounds like we're going to have one heck of a tournament coming up. Your last thoughts, Dan, before we break.
16 teams. It's gonna be a whole lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to getting into this. I guess my only disappointment is that none of the 9,000 teams that I work for are in there. But it's gonna feel really good just to watch these games and watch these teams go at it. I think it's great for the game that we have some different teams and some different brands and some different logos going to go head to head against one another, and I think that's going to feed a lot of excitement out of their fan bases. And I hope that it pays off. I hope we get some good 1-goal games end to end, tape to tape, and I'm ready for the ride. I'm ready to strap in, Ed.
Well, Dan Rubin, thanks for filling in on short notice pinch hitting for Jim Conley once again. It's always a pleasure to have you on board.
Oh, I love jumping in here with you. It's Jimmy called me sick this afternoon, and I was sitting there thinking to myself, I was like, oh, I feel bad for him that he was sick, but I didn't feel too bad. I felt bad, but I didn't feel too bad.
Well, we appreciate you sitting in. And again, our podcasts down the stretch have been sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four. You can visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. It's coming up quickly, April 11th and 13th at KeyBank Center in Buffalo. For Dan Rubin, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time on the USCHO Weekend Review podcast.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review podcast, a production of US College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe. uscho.com